Hello, everyone. Welcome to the April 2024 Staff and Student Workforce Development Interest Group call. Today's call, we're going to be discussing some of the things that we've done in the past and working a little bit on some topics of the future. In some sense, this is a similar call than we did about a year ago when we talked about the work that we did over the past year and the results from Nexus Day. So just a reminder that this call is for you and by you. So it's only possible by your participation. So thanks, and we really appreciate your input. A lot of the materials that get generated from these calls get used to develop products or ideas and help move things forward, and we really appreciate your contributions. And in general, this is about workforce development for research computing and data professionals. So how can we support current RCD professionals, future RCD professionals, institutions, and those types of things. And it's both for RCD programs and for individuals that are research and computing data professionals. And so briefly, I want to give a little context where we are, or where did we come from? And then talk about a little bit about Nexus Day 2024, and then we'll go on to our RCD training plan discussion. So where are we? So we did the career phases paper when we first started working within this interest group, and generally talking about where people are in their career phase. We were able to generate a paper out of that. From that, we tried to overlay that onto the HR Job Family Framework. We worked on that. Those of you who don't know what the HR Job Family Framework is, it's a HR framework that you can use for RCD professionals. It provides both differentiation for individuals in different facings, so system-facing, data-facing, managerial tracks, but also allows progression. So not all institutions have progression within a particular field. You might just be a system analyst forever and ever. And that's difficult for promotion and retention when folks are unable to go through different pay grades and get the acknowledgement that they're contributing and progressing in their career. So the HR Job Family Framework provides both dimensions on that, and it's written in an HR friendly manner. And so a lot of people can just drag and drop most of it in there, change some of the terminology to match what their institution is, insert your name here sort of thing. And there's a number of universities that have successfully implemented this. And some of the topics later on, we talked about mentoring, and that spawned off the RCD Mentoring Working Group. And finally, we worked on the RCD onboarding checklist. That was a follow-up from the work we did at Nexus Day in 2023. So there was a staff and student workforce development track where we talked about these things. We did some brainstorming activities, and we worked together to develop the paper. And so thanks for everyone who participated in writing that paper. So we're going to have Nexus Day again this year. It's the Sunday before PERC. PERC registrations is open, so feel free to adjust your travel plan so you're around for an extra day. There will be support for individuals that are coming to PERC, specifically for people that may not ordinarily be able to attend PERC. That's where the funding will be prioritized for those individuals. So feel free to apply. And we're still working out the details. So part of what we're doing today is kind of getting a feeling of what things would be interest of you for a Nexus Day in terms of the staff and student workforce development. Welcome to those who just joined us, and we'll paste the notes in the chat so you can access those. We were just covering what we've done in the past few, I guess, a year and a half or so. And if you can see, it's kind of a progression. We've gone from where are you in RCD career to onboarding, and now we're going to move into training. And so we're going to have a little bit of discussion about what your training plans are. But first, I'd like to open it up to the floor, and so I can stop talking. What types of things would you like to see in a workshop at Nexus Day? What things would you find interesting, useful, urgent, and it could be things to learn or working on together. In the past, pre-pandemic, there was a number of CARC workshops. They, for me, were the most professionally rewarding experiences where we got together as groups and developed products. So for instance, the facings was initially developed by some folks, and then that was really flushed out and worked over with in a CARC workshop. Same with the HR family framework that was initially flushed out in a workshop as well. So there's a lot of other examples of that where people got together and really addressed what are some of the needs together and produced some really long-lasting artifacts on that. So I'll open up the floor to folks who have some ideas on what they'd like to see out of a Nexus Day event. No ideas at all. Well, if you think about something while we're talking, feel free to put it into the chat or the call docs. With that, we can move on to our next slide. Oh, that is the last slide. Okay, and to the topic of the day, which is the RCD training plan discussion. So the general setting of the context here is, what do you have for a training plan for yourself, for your team? What does it look like? What would you like it to do? So we're taking input from all forms of people that are, sorry, all forms of training, people thinking about it from all different directions. And the idea is that this training is ongoing training for career growth and development. It's not the onboarding part. That's what we talked about in the previous working sessions where we developed the paper on the onboarding getting started. This is how do you continue your professional development? How do you move your way up through the different tracks? And the other thing is it's training for ourselves, RCD professionals, and our team, rather than for researchers. So what do you do for your team? What do you do for yourselves? And it's for RCD professionals. It's not for the researchers themselves. Now, there might be some things that have overlap. For instance, it might be important for system-facing folks to take a data carpentries, right? They take it from a researcher perspective. They get to see how the researchers receive this information, what tools they use, maybe even get to interact with some researchers themselves, but they're learning it from a different context. Same with other folks. They could see, well, how do other people teach it as well? There's also carpentries trainings, things like that. So there's lots of different contexts that you can use different trainings in. And so that's what we're thinking there. All right, so this is the part where we get interactive. So we have the document there. So if you go in the document, there's a number of tables. And the idea is that you put in your institution, put your response there, and that's how we can keep them kind of separate. If you want, you can use University 1 and University 2. But in general, these are not publicly available. And so, for instance, the first question is, and it's a combined question, and you'll see in a second why we did it this way. Do you have or have participated in an organized RCD training program, right? And so what is your approach to training for you and yourself and your team? So the answer will change based off the first question, but we just didn't want a yes or no. So I know for when I was at the University of Missouri, I sent my team members to the Oklahoma virtual residency. And I had them go to a number of things like that. And I developed a training plan for them. And it typically was go to a bunch of conferences in the beginning. So that's sort of on the onboarding part, but it was sort of, could be more, an early career stage thing. And then they would go on a cadence where they would go to one of the the major conferences in their area, and every once in a while go to another one. So for instance, the system-facing folks always went to Supercompute. But every once in a while, the other folks would join them at Supercompute because it's cool to see that stuff. And I think it's important for everyone to understand what the hardware is like. All right, somebody take over. I'm going to mute myself.
So does anybody want to share what organized programs that they take advantage of, or how they approach training for yourself or your team? I'm not a huge fan of picking on people, but I could do it.
And thank you for those of you who are participating in the document.
Betsy, do you want to talk a little bit about kind of what you have done?
Yeah. So in my previous role, so most of you probably know I was I ran a group of sysadmins. So I want to focus just particularly on them. What we did is we built for especially early career, we did a pre-assessment to understand what tools and technologies and basically skills they had as they were coming in. And then we developed a peer checklist that the leaders and mentors would make sure that the sysadmins were getting X amount of training per year. And as an extra step to that, we would actually write that into their reviews, and then we were able to mark that off. And I think especially focusing on those early career folks, getting them up to speed on certain categories is really important, but then not forgetting the mid to late career, because we should be challenging them as well. I think that training is so far advanced, and you're right, Claire. We've used the tax Linux, that's Linux sysadmin class they've had. I'm drawing a blank on the name of it. Um, we've used a lot of the open source that's available to LinkedIn. I don't know if your university has LinkedIn training available. There is tons of LinkedIn training opportunities that you can take advantage of. But then most importantly, we would send our staff to conferences to learn specific things like edge, bleeding edge technology. So if there's a new storage kind of thing coming up, we would take advantage of conferences to hear what vendors are doing, and also sitting in on some of the HPC CISPRO workshops, because they do a lot of training and sorts like that. So we really took advantage of, I wouldn't say free, but things that were available in the community. And then in terms of my personal goal, I always I'm very diligent about understanding my gaps every year. I do a self respective, like, where am I at? And I try to build in what are my gaps that I feel for the current position and where I want to go. And then I kind of do my own training plan. I don't know if that's helpful, Claire.
Yeah, it's definitely helpful. When I was at Mizzou, we were a growing program. I was growing the program. And so I had a training program, but it was up here. I was wondering, Betsy, it sounded like you were more mature. Did you have one written down at all? Like, what is the plan, and be more formal about it?
Yeah, we did. Actually, we would put it in when a person would start, we would meet with them, and then they'd get an Asana project, and then a training would just automatically get dumped into their Asana project. You could, for those that don't know Asana, it's like a project management. So like Monday.com, or name your favorite tool. But we also had that documented in our staff uh, training plan that we did every year.
Yeah.
And it would be updated depending on technology. So for instance, when Composable started coming out, we really had to put that on okay, now we got to get trained. Everyone needs to get trained on what is Composable.
Yeah, I did that as well, in terms of like each individual had a training plan for the year, but I was thinking more, like a broader picture of it. Like, so for instance, for me, it would be, you would start off with going to all the conferences, and then you would go to your major conference and then one other conference. And I would like to have them kind of move around to something different, depending on their area, which is, or as you said, whatever's the new hotness is.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I leveraged a lot was to make sure that individuals would do a workshop at one of the larger conferences, since they're already there, and make that have them ahead of time identify which ones were important and things like that.
I'd be interested to know how many people use conferences as part of their training plan, but how do you hold people, this sounds bad, but how do you hold people accountable that they just don't go and like, like without a directed kind of approach, right? With normal training, there are objectives and there are, there's a training plan associated, where with conferences, it's much harder. And I've developed kind of a follow-up form for my staff to fill out so that which sessions you get the most out of? What are your follow-ups? How are you going to use this, what you learned in the conference? But do others have some way that they track or that they utilize conferences for training? Do people use thumbs up? Do people use conferences as part of their training? Okay, well, that's good. And so are you just held accountable individually on your own on how you utilize that time and effort?
Hey Claire, it's Justin.
Yay.
What we've tried to do in the past is like ask them to do a brown bag when they get back for those in the group that haven't been there. So like low stakes. I like your idea of having a checklist to say, hey, what are some of the things that you got the most out of ahead of time so they know what to be tracking while they're there. So the brown bag sometimes can be not as fruitful if you don't have kind of a framework for them to go off of like you're describing, but brown bags seem to be one. We did that with EDUCAUSE one year, and that was the criticism from the CIO about just letting people go to these conferences. The push there also would be to like force them to be reviewers or like get involved in the conference itself, so they're actually in the agenda somehow. But that's hard for early career people too. They just don't know where they fit. So you've got to feather the line on that,
Yeah.
We were lucky to have a booth at Supercompute, so we made even our sysadmins do booth presentations. They're only 15 minutes. They were really nervous doing it, but they did an awesome job and they got a lot out of it. So I think participating in the conferences themselves, I think, is an important part of the process.
I'm here today because I'm hiring 2 new people in my unit, and we have like this sketched out training plan right now. And yeah, so that's why we're here. So by the end of the month, I'll have 2 new people that will be starting and trying to like that, Betsy, that whole idea of a self-assessment ahead of time. That's super like, oh yeah, current state might be helpful other than that resume that I reviewed 3 months ago. But yeah, structuring that. So that was a good idea. Thanks.
And I guess at that point in time, they can be honest where their holes are.
Yeah.
And where you can fill them in, right?
Yes, so I think conferences they are a very good way to assess the direction of evolution of things, where the knowledge evolution is heading, because you get to see a lot of what everybody is doing in a single spot. And you can then, based on what you see, evaluate where you stand and figure out how much road you have to travel. And then you find the gaps and you find ways to fill. But as far as I'm concerned, I've never really had any of my boss ask me what happened at a conference since I graduated. I finished grad school. Usually when you go to a conference, you sit down and do some sort of a review, but I've never had that. And so I picked the conferences that I think I can learn more out of. And there are things that I know I need to be aware of. I need to learn this. I'm missing this. What are people doing? What is going on? So that's how I pick. But now that I equally have people with whom I'm working, so most of them come from the enterprise world, and they're not very familiar with the research computing. So a conference would be a very good place for them to start. Not expecting a lot for the first timers, because it's gonna take some time for them to figure exactly where they want to be.
Yeah, thank you, Jacob. Well, in
On
the
the
interest of-
topic of
go ahead, Amy.
on the topic of conferences and using them as part of a training plan, I think that it's also reasonable, and I've done this with some of my staff, is to send them to a conference with learning objectives. I mean, there's nothing that says that you can't. And even with an assignment to like bring back 3 things, or tell me, the number of people that you've met, or make sure you go to this session and bring that back to the rest of the group, because we need to know this thing. You're going there not just on behalf of yourself, but also on behalf of the group. And we expect you to learn, and these are the things we expect you to learn. So I think you can apply more structure around that conference attendance, even beyond the, hey, you're going to be expected to give a brown bag when you get back.
That's an awesome idea, Amy. And I think after a while, hopefully they start, people start, being able to make their own plans without even being asked. I remember I had a team member went to a BOF and he said, this 1 2-hour session, 90-minute session made the whole thing worthwhile, because it changed how we're going to do stuff. And so I think having folks realize that those possibilities are there, and how to look for them is important as well. All right, let's move on to the next topic. Now, that doesn't mean you can't continue typing in the previous topic, or add your own things as you think about them. How much do you or your team attend end user training, and how important is it for your professional development? For instance, OSG school, stuff you do internally. Talk about how people on the team, or you as an individual, find training targeted towards researchers specifically, and how do you leverage that? I'll start off with me. I think that carpentries is a great thing. Just attending them to see how people are taught. A great experience for me was becoming a carpentries instructor. Just again to see what the pedagogy is, and to see what the approaches are. I think for individuals that have not seen some of the material before, it's great, and not looked at teaching in a systematic way. I think it's a good thing. I know Exceed has some programs as well, or Access, I should say. Or some of the programs still are around from Exceed that are on the web, and Access has some available as well. I see Globus World Tour, OSG School, SDSC Summer Institute, Carpentries. Anyone here approaching the whole question from more from their own perspective, as opposed to a team perspective?
People find it difficult to differentiate between the onboarding and the ongoing training. I know, Justin, you were talking about hiring new people, and, some of the stuff that you talked about, I think of as onboarding. So we do 30-minute deep dives into our services and kind of support things that we do. And I consider those, even though they're training, I consider them onboarding.
And Claire and I have kind of a different perspective on this, because I think more when those parts are more like the training part of it, where it could be done in any particular order, and it doesn't look very much different than your continuous training, right? So you may go to your first supercompute, and that'll be one way for your onboarding, but you're also continuing on your training as well. it's that blurry line that there's stuff that's definitely onboarding, and there's stuff that's definitely training, and then there's those things in the middle which could be seen in different perspectives.
How about this? Do you often attend training that looks like end user training with the objective that then you will become a trainer, right? So you attend carpentries the first time and then you become an instructor helper and then you become an instructor, for example. Do you often do that? I feel like we've done that with carpentries and we've done that with OSG school.
How many have gone to another systems end user training event and used the materials for themselves or approaches? You know, some of the big access systems have some good training. Anyone, you know, go to those end user training and pick up pointers?
So I'll chime in here. So I actually am a data services librarian, and our HPC and advanced computing unit is situated within our IT department. So I enjoy a lot of the trainings from the vendor, as well as sitting in on trainings that my colleagues are facilitating and other sorts of external opportunities, including groups like this one, to be able to sort of build up my capacity in terms of vocabulary and thinking about the jargon, and then also getting a sense of the products and how researchers can make use of them, because I do work with researchers at all levels of the institution, and sometimes they often come to us in the library first, and we're able to then more easily refer them and be able to help answer some basic triaging questions as they have that need.
So, Anne, when you talk about vendor training, are you talking about things that the researcher may interact directly with, for instance, a commercial software package, or do you mean something like a hardware vendor where the researchers may not actually directly interact with the hardware vendors and what they're offering?
Typically speaking, within the scope of my role, I've done vendor trainings with software on the software side. So with respect to advanced research computing, thinking about things like Jupyter notebooks, if we have training on those, different sorts of data management tools that you all might use for large data sets relative to researchers who are working with tiny data sets, those sorts of things.
Thanks, Anne, for your perspective, and please continue to chime in. It's great to have somebody from the libraries here to give that different perspective. All right, I think, shall we move on to the next one? What has been the most effective component of your training as an RCD professional for your career, for your job, or for your team? And we'll limit this to training, because for me, a lot of it was mentoring, but maybe a particular training event or something that you did. Yeah, I see Claire. I was going to ask Claire what hers was going to be, but she's typing what mine is, the OU virtual residency training. That is our program, OU virtual residency program. I was fortunate enough to attend some of the early ones, and they were in person, and so they were a magical event.
I'll have to just chime in to say, we actually, the first time I attended was, I think, the second year they held it. And we actually implemented something very similar. We had Henry come out and work with us for a 3-day workshop with the University of California system. That we liked it that much.
What do folks think of the LCI Linux Clusters Institute for system facing?
This is the Linux Cluster Institute. Well, this is Becca from ASU, and we have found it to be a really great experience. We have hosted this training at our institute, allowing our admins a chance to present, but also we have found this to be a really great training to also attend when our team is available. So we recommend it.
Thanks, Rebecca. All right, how about for specific training? That's the next topic there. For specific facing training, which kind of leads to the LCI. Remember, we have software facing, data facing, policy and leadership, policy and strategy facing, researcher facing. Claire just mentions cloud facing, which is not really a facing, but I guess that means you're staring up, right?
Yeah, you could seriously consider cloud facing. Well, there's still a component of system as well. So if you're working at the edge, especially with all this, what is that, agriculture, research stations with all the instruments and sensors.
So, Anne, maybe you can help with this, the data facing aspect of it, right? The librarians often deal with data and curation. Are there some key topics there? Like, for instance, how would you rate the data life cycle in learning about that for researchers and other folks?
I'd say as one example resource or good resource to turn to, the Data Curation Network is a good one. And they have a number of primers available, so short pieces that talk to data curator audiences primarily, but they can be used by a diversity of folks, and those are open educational resources, so I can post a link. But they also have some nice virtual seminars that they make available on topics related to data curation. And then I would say to some extent, I think it's beneficial for data sets of all scales would be things around like topics related to data ethics, and then like recommended practices in terms of data cleaning and sort of those types of, but that might be more of an onboarding kind of training rather than continuing. And then sort of broader topics of importance to all researchers would be things around things like data privacy, those sorts of considerations. That may be less of a concern the larger the data set gets in some cases, but certainly if you're thinking about things in terms of preservation and sharing, making sure that folks who might be working with researchers who are working with large data sets, have some sense of like institutional requirements around things like IRB that they might need to be mindful of as they're helping to sort of curate and preserve and share out those data.
Thank you, Anne. Well, in the interest of time, we're going to jump down to the last question. You're welcome to fill in the other points as well in the meantime or after. But we wanted to ask, what training resources do you wish you had access to, or do you wish that existed? Sort of a gap analysis.
I'd be interested to know how helpful this session was to people.
Yeah, I mean, there's some nice lists of some other ideas for training for research facilitators or research consultants, so that's helpful to me. So thanks for putting your ideas in those tables.
So you could write in, a list of more resources might be one of the resources that you wish you had that existed. What about like actual training plans or
Yeah.
specific examples of training plans or specific training events or something like that?
Is it worthwhile to have this kind of a laundry list or categories of these lists for you all as a resource somewhere in our in the Nexus portal, or is that just too hard to maintain? Is it too, I mean, because it would be great if we could do +1s, right? It's one thing for me to like something, but everybody else to hate it. I feel like you need some ability to +1 it so you can say, well, this got 5 positive reviews or something. Is that of interest to people?
Well, it's of interest to me. I think just being here and listening to people talk how they make use of training or how the type of training plans that they have in place, it gives you an idea of what everybody is doing, and you kind of measure against that and see whether what you're doing is good or whether there are things that you need to improve on. So if there is a list where you can go over and take a look and see what everybody is doing, that can be very
I see Amy put in the chat CMMC and COI and all those lovely compliance programs or secure and regulated research programs. I know those will need very specific and formalized training because there's important aspects to those regimes that need to be adhered to. Alrighty. Well, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, this is Amy at MIT. I'm just curious, with the European Open Science Cloud, I think some of their work projects may have ended up putting together, they tend to be a little bit more organized than some of our US efforts. So I think some of their working groups may have put together a more structured training in these areas than we have in terms of like mapping out what our progression looks like and what are the different elements that should be known at different stages of careers and resources for those types of things as well. So that might be something that people are interested in looking at. That's the EOSC, the European Open Science Cloud. I know one of their previous projects, the Edison project, did quite a lot of work relating different stages around research compute and data, those professional roles to particular areas of knowledge as well. So that could be an area of interest when people are thinking about what are the objectives, learning objectives for different roles for progression in a professional way as well. So that could be a source.
Great. Thanks, Amy. We'll take a look at that. All right, we're 10 minutes to the hour. And so any last comments before we sign off? Well, thanks for attending, and we will see you all next time.